In this video, we're going to view the different kingdoms as they're classified under the three domains of life. So, as we mentioned in the previous lessons, all living things can be classified under three domains: domain bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. And each of those those domains can further be subdivided. The domain bacteria is divided into the kingdom bacteria. The domain archaea is divided into the kingdom archaea. And the domain eukarya is divided into protist, fungi, plant, and animal kingdoms. And so the goal of this unit is to go over each one of these domains and each one of the kingdoms within. And remember that kingdoms can be further divided into phyla, and that can be divided into more, and more. And those are the different levels or taxa of the hierarchy developed by Carl Linnaeus. So, how do we even classify organisms into these different domains and kingdoms? Well, we use a variety of different criteria. We'll use morphology, so physically what they look like, DNA and RNA sequences, how they feed themselves as their mode of nutrition, how they reproduce, their reproductive mode, their number of cells, and a few other things as well. So here you can see a table that summarizes the different domains. There's 3 of them, and then within each domain you can see a summary of the different kingdoms. And so you should be aware of the cell types, cell structures, number of cells, mode of nutrition, as well as examples of representative creatures and organisms from the different kingdoms and domains. So for this PowerPoint, we're going to do a general overview of some of the different features that we use to classify and determine which domain and kingdom an organism should be part of. Here you can see a list of the different kingdoms. Right now we are using a 6-kingdom system, so the eubacteria, archaea bacteria, part of the bacteria and archaea domains. Here we have the protist, fungi, plant, and animal, part of the eukarya domain. You can see their general features, which you should know, features about the cell walls, and some representative organisms. So the idea is that by the end of this presentation and by the end of the unit, you should be able to identify which domain and kingdom an organism is part of using some characteristics given to you. So for example, we can start off with this over here. I can make my own food. So you look for something that can make its own food. That would be mode of nutrition. Makes its own food. Well, you could be bacteria. You could be archaea. You could be a protist. You could be a plant. So you could be in either bacteria, archaea, or eukarya domain just with this information here. And we can narrow you down to about 4 kingdoms. I am unicellular. Well, let's see. You could be bacteria. You could be archaea. You could be protist. So now we've narrowed it down a little bit more. We could be still in any of the domains or any of the 3 domains, but we've narrowed it down to 3 kingdoms that are possible. My cells are prokaryotic. That means they do not have a nucleus. So let's go take a look. Cell type, prokaryote, prokaryote. Anything in eukarya is eukaryote, which means membrane-bound organelles. So since this is the next clue, we've narrowed it down to 2 kingdoms, 2 domains as opposed to 3. My cell wall is made up of peptidoglycan. Let's go take a look. Cell wall, peptidoglycan, without. So this means over here that we have narrowed it down, that we are in the domain bacteria and we are part of the kingdom eubacteria. Oftentimes we omit the word, the prefix eu. We just say domain bacteria, kingdom bacteria. And sometimes we'll omit bacteria over here and just say domain archaea, kingdom archaea. But you'll see both terms used. So let's start off with the number of cells. So number of cells is pretty much the most straightforward one. Some organisms can be multicellular, some can be unicellular, many cells, one cell. And so you can take a look at the different domains and kingdoms and you can see the individuals that make them up. So for domains in bacteria, in eubacteria kingdom, all of them are unicellular. Archaea, all unicellular. For eukarya, if you take a look, it varies based on the kingdoms. Animal, only multicellular. Plant, most are multicellular, some are unicellular. Fungi, most multi, some uni. Eukarya, protists, most are unicellular, some are multicellular, and some are colonial, which means they're unicellular, but sometimes they like to hang out in groups. So you can take a look at this as a method of classification for where to place organisms. So if I tell you that there is a unicellular organism, you can get rid of kingdom animal from your choice list because there's only multicellular animals. The other method of classification is based on cells, prokaryotes versus eukaryotes. So prokaryotes, pro means before, karyote means the nucleus, so before the nucleus. So prokaryotes are simple cells. They do not have membrane-bound organelles. Membrane-bound organelles are the organelles like your nucleus, your mitochondria, your chloroplast, your endoplasmic reticulum, your Golgi body, vacuoles. Those are all membrane-bound organelles. And when we say membrane-bound, the membrane is made up of this molecule, this big molecule called, and it looks like this, there's a head and two tails, called a phospholipid. So membrane-bound molecules are surrounded by a phospholipid membrane. Prokaryotes do not have membrane-bound molecules. The only membrane-bound organelle. The only membrane-bound organelle that the prokaryotes have is their actual cell membrane. So they have a cell membrane, but on the inside, for example, their DNA, it's not surrounded by a nucleus, because a nucleus is a membrane-bound organelle. Eukaryotes means true, U means true, true kernel, true nucleus. They are more complex cells, and they have membrane-bound organelles, like the nucleus, the mitochondrion, for example. So if you see a cell with its DNA surrounded by a nucleus, what that means is, or a nuclear membrane, what that means is you have a eukaryotic cell. So organisms in the domain bacteria and archaea, they're all prokaryotes. But organisms in the domain eukarya, they are all eukaryotes. So they have a nucleus and membrane-bound organelles as well. So here we can see a comparison of prokaryotic cell structure to eukaryotic cell structure. You can see that the eukaryotes are bigger, they're more complex, they have membrane-bound organelles like all these ones here, including chloroplast as well, which I didn't list here, and the vacuole, whereas the prokaryotes are a lot smaller, they're a lot simpler, they do not have a nucleus that surrounds their cell membrane, so their DNA rather. So here you can see the chromosome of a prokaryotic cell. It's not surrounded by a nucleus, no membrane-bound organelles. Whereas here, you can see a eukaryotic cell, the DNA is in here, surrounded by a nucleus. Other membrane-bound organelles can be seen as well. Even though they're different, they do have similarities because we all do come from a common ancestor after all. So the similarities that prokaryotes and eukaryotes share is that they all have ribosomes, which aren't membrane-bound, cytoplasm, DNA, flagella, the little tails to swim with. Some can have cell walls, not all, but plant cells, for example, and protists, and certain protists and fungi. And cell membranes, they all have a cell membrane. That's the only part that's really made up of phospholipids for the prokaryotic cells. And so here we have another table comparing prokaryotes to eukaryotes. You already know most of these, and you'll get to know most of these as we go throughout the unit. It's a good idea to be able to come up with comparison tables throughout the unit to compare and contrast various features in organisms and kingdoms as we go through them. Another method of classification is how they feed themselves, whether you're autotroph or heterotroph, or mixotroph. So autotroph is a self-feeder, meaning you can make your own organic molecules, you can make your own sugars through processes like photosynthesis. Heterotroph means you're a other feeder. You rely on other things to feed you. You have to go eat other organisms because you can't make your own energy-rich molecules. And mixotroph, well, it's a mix of both. They can sometimes do autotroph nutrition or heterotroph nutrition. And so you can take a look at the modes of nutrition for the various types of organisms under the different kingdoms. So essentially the focus of the unit is going to be to study each kingdom in detail with examples of organisms throughout. We're going to see the key features of each kingdom, key characteristics, some exceptions, but you do need to make sure that you are reading ahead and you are reading the textbook and looking at the PowerPoints and watching the videos posted online, because it's up to you to really memorize, understand, and sort of become an encyclopedia of the diversity of life that exists on Earth today. I want you to get a general sense of the variety of organisms within the different categories that we discuss. I also want you to get the idea that as we go from the more broad taxon to the least broad taxon, and more specific, there's fewer and fewer organisms. So for example, when you start a domain, eukarya, you have 4 to 10 million organisms um, in the eukaryote area. When you look at the kingdom, animal, 2 million organisms. When you look at the phylum, chordata, 50,000 organisms. So you get more and more and more specific and narrow as you go from domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus to species. And remember that we saw that the organism scientific name has two parts to it, the genus and the species over here, uppercase for the first letter, and in lowercase everything else, italicized or underlined if it's handwritten. So this picture here is the taxonomic classification of the gray wolf. We basically tell you its domain, its kingdom, its phylum, its class, its order, its family, its genus, and its species, and then using that information, you can figure out its scientific name. The way we classified the wolf is based on those various characteristics that we studied throughout this presentation. We know it has eukaryotic cells. It has features of animals. It has features of chordates. It has features of mammals. It has features of carnivore. It has features of the Canidae family. It has features of the genus Canis. So we use those different features, those different characteristics to classify this gray wolf into the these different phyla or different taxa. You should be aware of model organisms in pictures. So if I show you a picture of this, you should be aware that it's a bacterial cell. And by this point or later on, you'll know what this term coccus means or staphylo means. You should be aware that this might be an part of the domain archaea. This is an amoeba, so you'll know that it's a protist later on. This here's a rabbit, so you would know it's animal. This is a mushroom, so you would know it's from the fungus kingdom. This is a tree, so you would know it's from the plant kingdom. So you'll get a general sense of where all these organisms belong. This is an excellent table to review from your textbook. You are responsible for knowing the cell characteristics, other important characteristics, and representative organisms from each one of the kingdoms. You should know also where the domains come from, and you should know, as we go into each kingdom separately, the different phyla and categories of each kingdom. So for example, the eubacteria will have different categories of eubacteria. There'll be different categories of archaea, different categories of protists, fungi, plants, and animals, and you will be responsible for knowing those as well. This is the homework from the Nelson textbook. Make sure you read chapter 1. You can start reading chapter 2 on prokaryotes if you haven't already done so, and there's a video posted online for prokaryotes as well.